Okay. So we're going to look at a Jewish perspective on abortion today. Look at some Jewish sources, sort of something light. Talk about a Jewish view of abortion. I'll just explain that our discussion is really in three parts. Oh, he's such a tzaddik. You are such a nice person. Isn't that sweet? Kol hakavod. Simcha, it's such an honor to have you here. You know, in England, there was like this guy, like Mr. This and Mr. That, and they would have like happy by name and happy by nature. So that's you, your Simcha, which is happy by name and happy by nature. Bezrat Hashem for all of us. Okay. So, three parts. The first part is we're going to look at Psukim, and we're going to look at Mishnah, and we'll look at the Rambam. Now, when we look at these sources, when you look at Mishnah and the Rambam, obviously they're not talking about abortion. They're talking about, like how a fetus is discussed in halakha. You follow? Really, like what is background? You'd like to understand how halakha views a fetus. That's the first part. First part of so that's the Psukim, Mishnah, and the Rambam. The second part is a halachic discussion of a fetus. Like what's the status of a fetus in halakha? And the third section is modern, I would say, when I say modern, like in the last 50 years, modern halachic authorities giving their rulings on abortion. And there are three different opinions. Obviously, they all say it's forbidden, but they all have a different nuanced way of explaining why it's forbidden, and through that we can understand differences between these different opinions. Okay, so we're going to start with the classical sources, that is the Psukim, Mishnah, and the Rambam. But before I say that, I was reading a book this week, and I found out, I was surprised to read actually, that how high infant mortality rates were until relatively recently. Meaning the fact that people give birth and Baruch Hashem, the child survives, is a very modern idea. You know that the child, unfortunately, and we know we all hear stories once in a while, but it's very, very rare. Until 1950. 1950 is not that long ago. The mortality rate for a child, a mother giving birth to a child, was 1 in around 250. So one birth in every 250 didn't survive, which is a very high number. The child, which is a very high number. It means that when you think about pregnancy, when you think about a child coming into the world, nowadays, Baruch Hashem, thanks to medical advances, you have to daven every time. But if you hear that a woman is expecting a child, so you daven hard, and you sort of assume that, Ezrat Hashem, nature will follow its course, and a child will come into this world. But that's a very, very recent assumption in human history. Now, if we talk about, 3,000, 4,000 years of, really 5,000 years, I suppose, of human life. So then the last 70 years of that is really when there's been a huge breakthrough. So therefore, I say that because the whole discussion about abortions is also recent, because you never knew if a pregnancy would lead to a birth. So of course it was always, something that people might talk about, but because mortality rates were so high, that could have affected the way that people discussed, whether an abortion is appropriate or not. But now that Baruch Hashem, if the mortality rates are so low, so that means that the discussion of abortion has become a bigger discussion. Is that clear? Okay. So we're going to discuss a very, very important source. The first source we're going to look at is a source from Parashat Mishpatim. Parashat Mishpatim that we're going to read in a couple of weeks' time. Parashat Mishpatim, as you may know, is all many ben adam lechaveiro halachot about people borrowing, people lending. If somebody steals, chas v'shalom, or people harm one another. All those sorts of scenarios are discussed in Parashat Mishpatim, and this is one of them. So the the Torah tells us in Shemot, chapter 21, V'chi natzu anashim. If people are fighting, v'nakfu isha hara. They're two guys fighting one another. Chas v'shalom, it's such a terrible thing to speak about. And then one of them, instead of giving a right hook to the guy, he hits a pregnant woman. Chas v'shalom, v'yatzu yeladeh v'lo yihye ason. So she loses her child. V'lo yihye ason. Lo yihye ason means that the mother survives, meaning the baby doesn't, but the mother does. Anosh yanesh, the person who killed this fetus shall surely be punished. Kasher yashit alav bal ha'isha v'natan b'flilim, and he has to pay a fine. V'im ason yihye, but if chas v'sholom the mother dies, v'natata nefesh tachat nefesh, then he has committed a capital offense, and the person that killed the woman has to be put to death. You hear that? Yeah. So we're told these two psukim tell us two very, very important things, and these two very important things that will guide our whole discussion are: number one is, it's wrong to kill a fetus. How do you know it's wrong to kill a fetus? Because the Torah tells us that if someone does it, they're punished. Nachon anoshi anesh. You get punished. Oh, shalom aleichem. How are you doing? What a joy to see. This is your first time, right?
My second one.
Oh, second. I'm sorry. It was lovely to see you. Okay. So we know it's wrong. The first thing that we know is it's wrong. Anosh yanesh. And the second thing that we know, this is very important, is we know it's not murder. How do you know that abortion isn't murder based on these verses? Do you know how you can tell? Huh?
Accidentally?
Yes. I mean, yeah, but how can you prove it from the verses?
It's in the second, when it talks about the fatality of the woman, it compares it like
I thought that the woman died.
Yes.
Then kind of like as like the baby dying. Then say that.
Exactly. There's different punishments.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly. The punishment for destroying the fetus is the natan plilim is a monetary fine. You have to pay a fine, and if you kill the mother, then you're put to death. So I know that it's wrong, and I know it's not murder. Nachon, based on these psukim, is that clear? Yes.
The situation is like when two men together fighting.
Yeah.
And they accidentally hit the wife.
Yeah.
And the wife died.
Yes.
Oh, isn't it like the heater had to flee to Ermeklat because it's not.
No. It's a different story.
Oh.
No. Here, they're fighting one another, and one of them, instead of hitting the guy with whom he's having an argument, he hits this woman. If he kills the woman, then he's put to death. He committed murder. But if he doesn't kill the woman, but he does kill the fetus, then he's punished and he pays a monetary fine. So it's wrong, but it's not murder. You follow how that follows. Okay. Now, based on that, and then the psukim continue. You know the famous verse, Ein tachat ein, shein tachat shein, yad tachat yad, regel tachat regel. So you pay an eye for an eye, which has caused a lot of problem because it's talking about a monetary compensation. Anyway, I'll just share one quick thing, just if you're interested in these things. I translated the word ason as murder. So if you look at verse 22, it says, if two men are fighting and they hit a pregnant woman and they kill the fetus, but they didn't kill the woman, v'lo yihye ason, right? So we're translating the word ason as murder. Nachon? Now, just for you to know, the Catholic tradition translates the word ason as formed. formed, meaning if they're fighting, they hit this woman and the fetus isn't formed, then you pay a monetary fine. Aval imason yihiyeh, we translated that to mean if you kill the mother, right? If you kill the mother, then you get put to death. But they translate it as if the fetus is formed, then, and that's why the Catholic position on abortion is harsher. There is for them no distinction between killing a person and killing a fetus, because their reading, their incorrect reading of the word ason is whether the fetus is formed or not. But we understand it with the Torah Sheba'al Peh that it means if the mother is killed. And therefore we can come to the conclusion that killing a fetus is wrong, but killing a fetus isn't murder. But they would say it's all murder. You follow? Okay, based on these psukim, the Mishnah that we're going to see in source number 2 follows smoothly. Do you see the Mishnah in source number 2? The Mishnah says, Ha'isha shehi maksha leilet. If a woman is going through difficulties in childbirth, when it says a woman who is going through difficulties during childbirth, it means that she is in life-threatening danger during childbirth. You follow? Then, mechatchin et havlad b'me'eha u'motziin oto evarim. You're allowed to remove the fetus from her in order to save her life. Why? Mipnei shechayeha kodmim lechayav. Because her life takes precedence over the life of the fetus. However, once yatsa rubo ein nogim bo she'ein tochin nefesh tachan havesh. But once the fetus is born, then you can't play around, because then it's two human beings. Why would one human being take precedence over the other one? So this Mishnah follows very smoothly from what we saw in the Psukim. You're not allowed to destroy a fetus, but if you're faced with that terrible decision of saving the life of the mother or saving the life of the fetus, the life of the mother comes first. You hear that? Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, that is the Mishnah. Now, look at this. This is really fascinating. I don't know if anyone will spot this. We've really discussed now, I wouldn't say there's no debate on everything that we've just said just now. I don't think we've said anything controversial, anything that any of the Tanaim or Amoraim would disagree with. The Rambam, as you know, takes sources from the Torah, takes sources from the Mishnah and from the Gemara, and he wrote a Sefer Halacha called Mishneh Torah. Now, when the Rambam takes what we just learned and he writes the Mishneh Torah, he tweaks it a little bit. So I'm going to read the Rambam, and then afterwards I'm going to ask you what the tweak of the Rambam is. Do you follow where I am? Source number 3. So the Rambam tells us like this: Arei zo mitzvat lo taseh. There is a negative mitzvah. Lo lachus al nefesh harodef. You're not allowed to have mercy on the soul of a pursuer. Do you know what a pursuer is? So in halakha there is a concept of haba lehorgecha, hashkem lehorgo, which means if somebody is about to kill Reuven is allowed to kill that person to save Reuven's life. You follow? Why? Because that guy, if I don't kill him, he'll kill me. You follow? So I'm allowed to kill him to save my life. That's the din of a rodef. Does that make sense to you? Because normally, I'm not allowed to kill somebody else to save my life. You follow? But if he's about to kill me, I can save my life by killing him. You follow? But that's different. If I'll contrast that. If a guy is holding a gun and he says, "Kill him or I'll kill you," then you have to give up your life. You follow? But in this situation, he's not saying, "I'll kill him or you," or not, "I'll kill him or," you follow? He's saying, I'm going to kill you. Well, if he says that we're going to kill you, then in my self-defense, I can kill him before he kills me. You follow? That's the din of rodef, and that's, I suppose, the exception to the din of the three cardinal sins. So I'm killing somebody to save my life, but I'm killing him to save my life because he was about to kill me, not because he was about to kill somebody else. Is that clear? Okay.
How strong is that when he says kill rodef? Like, is it saying the fetus is like a rodef, but the fetus doesn't have free will?
So that's it. That is, if you have a look.
Yeah.
Let me just finish the Rambam. You'll see that's his chidush. Lefichach haru chachamim, the rabbi said, shahu bara, if there was a pregnant woman, she maksha leled, and she's having a tricky time during childbirth, mutar lachtoch ha'ubar b'me'eha, like the Mishnah, you're allowed to cut up the fetus in whatever way you need to. Why? Because the life of the mother takes precedence over the life of the fetus. There's one other little difference. I don't know if you can see this. It says, V'im misha hotzi rosho. If you look in the Mishnah says, if the majority of the fetus has been born, then it's already a human, then it's two people, and then you can't put the life of one person ahead of the life of somebody else. Nachon? He uses the Mishnah uses the word rubo, the majority of the fetus. But the Rambam doesn't say the word, yes, excellent. The Rambam says, Yatzar Rosho. If the head has come out, then it's already a human being. So the question is, at what stage of birth do I switch from being a fetus to a human being? So the Mishnah says, at the time when the majority of the fetus is removed, is out of the, being born. And the Rambam says once a head is born. You follow?
I guess the Rambam is more lenient because when a baby, chas v'shalom, comes out feet first, there's a lot more complications. Like,
yeah, right.
Like,
Nachon.
So you don't want to give birth that way. Like, that's why they do C-sections.
Nachon. Quite right.
So yeah, seems to be more lenient.
I imagine in that case, that's probably why the Mishnah says rubo, and not rosho.
No, the Mishnah would be more strict because it would still, that would qualify, like if it was coming feet first and most of its body was out, then by the Mishnah you couldn't do anything to save the woman. Well, I mean, like you couldn't kill the fetus to save the woman, but Rambam would say, "Oh, the head's not out yet."
Yeah, nachon. Quite right. But the main, that's like a minor. I wouldn't say it's minor, but that's not the difference I wanted to focus on. The second one that Zechariah starts talking about is this whole idea of a rodef. Why am I allowed to kill the fetus according to the Rambam? Because the fetus has got the din of a rodef. Now, how can the fetus have the din of a rodef? It's got no mind. It's not acting with intent. This is a fetus that's literally he's not even born yet. So it's a very, very difficult idea. But the Rambam, I imagine, is struggling to find a legitimate reason for destroying the fetus to save the mother. You follow? So it's true that the Mishnah says that the life of the mother takes precedence over the life of the fetus. And we saw in the Pasuk that even though you're not allowed to destroy a fetus, killing a fetus is different to killing a human being. Despite all of that, the Rambam still needs to justify destroying a fetus, and therefore, even though it's not really a rodef, it can't be a rodef. It doesn't have dad, it hasn't got intent. So it's not a rodef, but the Rambam has to introduce another factor in order to allow us to destroy the fetus. Is that clear to everybody? Okay.
What qualifies a rodef as a rodef? A rodef is something that's chasing after your life. Does it have to have intent to be doing so?
Oh, yes, that obviously not.
So it's a rodef.
Nachon, you're quite right.
What does it have to do with it?
Well, a rodef is always a person. Like animal,
yeah.
You don't have to say anything about. So,
yeah, we're only talking about people.
It's still a rodef. It's just an animal as opposed to a person.
Well,
Here it's a baby that doesn't know what it's doing, but it's still instinctively doing so. It's a rodef. It's after your life.
But I can imagine if there's a human being that's doing something, I wonder if I'd be allowed to kill. I think for a sort of an adult, the intent is an important aspect of being a rodef. It's hard for me to imagine a scenario, I'm just trying to think, like in the train tracks and stuff like that, someone's driving a car and I'm lying on the road. I'm not allowed to, and he's got no intent of killing me. I can't kill him so that he'll drive off the road in order to save my life. You know what I mean? So I think in halakha, I would need intent in an adult in order for the person to be classified as a rodef. And I think that this use of the concept of a rodef in the Rambam over here is really the Rambam really working hard to explain how it is we're allowed to kill a fetus. You follow? And therefore he's like, bringing out every possible, sort of like all the somethings in the, bringing, like, to make it the strongest argument as possible, pulling as many feathers in his bow. Is that a phrase?
Feathers out of his hat? I don't know.
I don't know. We understand. Doesn't matter. You understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, so far we haven't discussed abortion at all. We've only discussed the difference between murder and killing a fetus. You follow? And it's certainly clear that they're both wrong. It's certainly clear they're both wrong, but murder's worse. And that's why you save the life of the mother before the life of the fetus. Okay. Now we're just going to spend a few minutes on topic number 2. Topic number 2 is also a pre-abortion discussion. And that is a question of pikuach nefesh for a fetus. Let's say a woman, nowadays, chas v'shalom, it's on Shabbat, and she's worried about the health of her fetus. Would she be allowed to break Shabbat to go to hospital to save the life of a fetus? Because if I'm saying that there's a difference between a fetus and a human being, and like this murder to kill a human being, could I say there is a din of pikuach nefesh for a fetus?
Yes. Because it's still inside, it's still connected to her. If something happens to the fetus, it could affect her as well.
So you're saying you can break Shabbat for a fetus, not because of the fetus, but because it's part of the mother.
Yes.
And therefore you're saving the life of the mother.
Yes.
Yeah, anyone else?
I was thinking maybe like you're allowed to break Shabbat even if something's not going to kill you in the moment, but it could lead to you dying in the future.
Right.
So maybe that's why you could break Shabbat for the fetus, because even though it's not alive right now, you could be like in the future preventing it from living. Like, I don't know, it's kind of a weird. Because
very clever. Meaning, this fetus is the principle. One of the principles. There are different arguments proposed to explain why we're allowed to break Shabbat to save a life. And one of them is break one Shabbat for this person, in order that in the future they'll be able to keep many Shabbatot. So you're sort of taking that principle. This fetus, Bezrat Hashem, if we break Shabbat for this fetus now, they'll have 120 years of Shabbatot that they will enjoy. After I'm by saving this fetus's life, I'm giving it 120 years of Shabbatot. That's what you're...
It's especially like, you expect the fetus to be born, right? So
yeah.
So you
especially nowadays.
It is pikuach nefesh. You expect this fetus to be born. It's not in this sort of like state where it's completely uncertain.
Yeah. No, you're right. Especially, at the time of the Gemara, you might have argued just because of, unfortunately, the rates of, a childbirth not going smoothly. But today, where things have been revolutionized so significantly, it's a different thing. I'll just tell you one little thing in brackets. I should have mentioned it earlier. You know how the average life expectancy is today much higher than it ever was in human history. One of the reasons people are living longer, but it's not just that people are living longer, but that if there are less infants dying in childbirth, that skews the numbers. You follow? If every 1 in 10 lives like years ago lived for a day or a month, And now, Baruch Hashem, the numbers are much higher. So those very, very early deaths would skew the numbers. But now they do it. So then for everybody, people are, so there's two factors that are leading to the right, to the fact that the birth rate, the life expectancy goes up. Okay, so the Mishnah that we're going to look at now doesn't talk about Chilul Shabbat. It talks about eating on Yom Kippur. Now this is not a terrible example because this is different to your example, Mr. Zachariah. Because, or maybe more with like what Avadia and Simcha was saying a minute ago, and that is, if I was Mechalel Shabbos, you're saying that the life of the mother is in danger. Now, when we talk about fasting on Yom Kippur, there's a good chance that the mother, she fasted last year, the mother could fast. I'm worried that the fetus that needs needs to be sustained, the fetus that needs to survive, that's where I'm worried about, like fasting or not fasting. So would a mother be allowed not to fast, but not for her sake, but for the sake of a fetus? And here, it's a clearer distinction because her life isn't in danger. It is just a fetus. So that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah in source number 4 says, Ubara, a fetus, shehiricha, smells food, ma'achilin ota ad sheteshiv nasha. So if the fetus smells food, in other words, the mother feels that the fetus needs to eat, the mother is allowed to eat on Yom Kippur, not to save her life, because she would survive, but to save the life of the fetus. You hear that? Now that's very important because that gives the fetus a very important status. It means that a fetus is pikuach nefesh worthy. Now I'll just explain how important that is. In the previous, when we looked at the psukim earlier, we said that there's a difference between killing a person and killing a fetus. If you kill a person, then the punishment is death. But if you kill a fetus, you have to pay a monetary fine. Now, the fact that you have to pay a monetary fine for killing a fetus might make me think that in halakha, my fetus has got the same status, lahavdil, the same status as my cow or my car or my anything else, that if you destroy my property, you have to compensate me for destroying my property. You follow? But now, by looking at this Mishnah over here, we see that it seems to be a different category. You've got the category of killing a person, and that's obviously murder, that's murder. And then you have like destroying my property, and you pay compensation when you destroy my property. But there's no din of pikuach nefesh for property, nachon. And then the money that I pay for killing a fetus is in the middle. You hear that? Meaning it's a different category. It's not murder, but it's also not property. So even though I happen to be paying a monetary fine, I'm not paying a monetary fine because it's compensation for destroying property. It's a different category. How do I know? Because the din of pikuach nefesh applies to a fetus. You hear that? Okay, so that's the Mishnah. But look at how subsequent commentaries on the Mishnah sort of clarify what the Mishnah is talking about. So Rashi on the Mishnah says this: Uba Rasha hiricha, if the fetus smelt food. Now look at this. See what it says. Haubar meriach reach tabshil vehi mit ava lo ve'imena ochelet. If the fetus isn't given the food, shneihen mesukanin. Do you hear that? This goes a bit like what Simcha was saying earlier. So why are you allowed to feed the fetus? Because if you don't, the life of the mother and the fetus will be in danger. So therefore, Rashi is trying to perhaps, is that the right word? Sort of lower the status of a fetus. Why is the mother allowed to eat on Yom Kippur? Because by her eating, she's saving her life. You follow? Mashma from Rashi, that if it was only to save the life of the fetus, maybe She wouldn't. But that's a hypothetical situation. You follow that couldn't exist. Because whenever she feels hungry, not eating would put her life in danger. But Rashi has to point out what's allowing her to eat is because it's her life. So he's sort of possibly downgrading the halachic status of a fetus. You hear that? Was anyone going to make a comment? Joy? Okay. Now if you have a look at the Torah is very, very interesting. Torah is a Sefer Halakha. It's actually right behind you there. Idan. Do you see that on the top shelf there? Yes, exactly, that's the Torah. The Torah is a Sefer Halakha. Just like the Rambam. There were two Sifrei Halakha upon which many other Sifrei Halakha were written. The Mishneh Torah of the Rambam and the Torah, which was written by the son of the Rosh. Did you ever learn Rabbeinu Asher? Oh, where is it? We have an Asher in our class sometimes. But there's a different Rabbeinu Asher. Anyway, so his son is a Torah. So the Torah, on what we were discussing, says like this. Ubarot uminikot. If a woman is expecting a child or she's breastfeeding, mitanot, they fast. Umashimot b'yom kippurim. Ubarashi richa ma'achal. But if a woman smelt food on Yom Kippur, v'im lo yitnu la mimeno mistaken hi, o havlad. Now, this is basically, the Gemara tells us this. The Gemara in Yoma, but the Torah says it too. Do you know what you do? This is such a cute thing to do. So, the Ubar is hungry. Do you know what you do? You go over to the mother and you whisper in her ear, it's Yom Kippur today. Isn't that cute? Lo chashin bo'ozna shayom Yom Kippurim. Im tityashev da'ata mutav. If that works and the fetus calms down, great. V'im lav toch vin kush berotev umachnisim letoch pia. You give it like some gravy, like a taste of something. V'im nityashev da'ata mutav. Good. V'im lav notnim la mina rotev. V'im lo nityashev da'ata bazen notnim la mina isur atzmo. You're allowed to give her food. Okay, is that clear to everybody? Mm-hmm. Nowadays, Be'ezrat Hashem, for all of you, when you find your soulmate, and Be'ezrat Hashem, with your soulmate, you're blessed to bring a child into the world, and then you wonder what to do on Yom Kippur, don't base yourself on what we said just now. Speak to a rabbi to get a Pesach Halacha. Huh?
Rabbi, doctor.
Yes, absolutely, quite right. Speak to a doctor and a rabbi, absolutely. Okay, Beseder. So, based on what we seen just now on the status of a fetus, it is clear that a fetus has a unique status in halakha. It's not a human being, but it's not property. It's a potential human being. I like what you said, Zachariah, earlier about like a Bezrat Hashem, it will keep 120 years of Shabbat. Well, maybe we'll give them a couple of years until they become, and bend up. We'll give them 110 years. The first 10 years when they're still figuring out what to do. But 110 years at least, Bezrat of Shabbat observance. So that's enough reason to allow you to break Shabbat for this fetus. Okay. Everything clear until now? Okay, we finished part 1. We looked at the Mishnah and the Gemara to understand the status of a fetus, to understand really how halakha looks at a fetus. The second one was an example of pikuach nefesh. Now, with all of that, we can now turn to the modern question of abortion. And on the modern question of abortion, we're going to look at 3 opinions. 3 opinions. All of them agree that it is forbidden to do an abortion, but they all have different understandings of why it might be forbidden to do an abortion. Now, notice that it can't be. It's not like it has to be a sin. You understand what I mean? It can't just feel wrong. It has to be one of the 613 mitzvot. I have to be transgressing a particular avera. when I'm doing an abortion today? Well, our discussion that we discussed in Parshat Mishpatim was where accidentally they hit a woman, and as a result, they lost a fetus, and from that we understood that it's not murder. But we didn't understand what it is, meaning what mitzvah have I transgressed if, God forbid, somebody does an abortion? You hear that? Do you understand my question? Now there has to be an Aveira that I did wrong, which, if I go look at the list of 613 mitzvot, so which mitzvah did I break when I did an abortion? You hear that? So the truth, there are lots of different interpretations. There's one interpretation I didn't put in here. I'll mention it before we start. It's from a very early Rishon. His name was the Chavot Yair. And he said, it's a very, very, it's unusual. I think it was from the 12th or 13th century. He has responsum Chavot Yair, and he writes that there is an Isur. Men have a prohibition of spilling seed. It's a hashchatat zera. Now, when you destroy a fetus, you are, I know it's a later stage, but you're destroying, it's an extension of that same Isur of hashchatat zera. The only problem with that, not the problem with that, is that it's a woman transgressing the prohibition. If it's a woman who decides to do it, then if there's a couple and the husband, would like to bring a child into the world, and the wife decided that she wants to not, to have an abortion, so who do we say that he committed the sin of hashchatat zera? It's just a difficult to see it like that way, but really, in a way, it's quite logical, and I explain why. Sort of, you have one extreme is hashchatat zera, which is destroying seed, nachon, and then you have murder, right? Now, both of them are destroying life. You follow? But until birth, any destruction of a life until birth reverts to the previous isur. You follow? Which would be hashchatat zera. Does that make sense to you? Okay, that's one opinion. I didn't put it in the sheet. I'm not sure why, actually. I was trying at the time to keep it compact, but we've got time, so I mention that. Okay. On our sheet, he was much earlier. Rav Yair Bachrach lived in I'm not sure exactly, but something like in the 13th or 14th century. So he's really a much older understanding of what's wrong with abortion. The three sources that we're going to look at now are all from within the last 80 years. Yeah, all of them were written within the last 80 years. So that was a much older one. Okay, meaning all three that we're looking at now are really tackling with the modern problem of abortion. You follow? Okay. Okay, so the question was asked to Rabbi Uziel. Rabbi Uziel was the chief rabbi of the Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel. I think he was the first Sephardi chief rabbi of Israel. And he writes like this. He was a woman. We said that a woman is allowed, if the life of a woman is in danger, then she is allowed to put her life in front of the life of a child. Nachon? That's what we saw in the Mishnah in Ohalot. What happens if the life of the woman isn't in danger, but she might lose her sense of hearing through the birth process? Would the woman be allowed to abort the fetus, not to save her life, but to save one of her senses? You follow? Meaning, she would. The doctors told her previously that her body wouldn't be able to cope with a pregnancy, and she became pregnant. And now, if she goes through to term in this pregnancy, she'll lose a sense of hearing. So would she be allowed to have an abortion in order to save her sense of hearing. You hear? Matem choshvim.
If you go according to the spilling the seed argument, then yes, she could have an abortion. Because,
Why?
right? Is it?
No, because that would be hashchata. That would,
I don't have a logic behind it, but it just seems to me
like your hearing has to be more important than.
spilling the seed.
I was thinking that
Is losing your sense of hearing considered enough to say that it's sakana nefashot? Because at the end of the day,
It's not sakanat nefashot.
Right. What I'm saying is that isn't considered enough of a sakana that you would say, okay, get rid of the child for that. Is it enough of a danger to your own health, to your own life?
To lose your hearing?
So it's certainly like no quality of life. Like she'll lose.
Lose the hearing. I mean, in today's day and age, you can always get a hearing aid, or whatever. It might not be perfect, but you can still hear.
Yeah.
Back then, I'm sure it was slightly different.
It was 1950s.
Yeah, but I don't know.
So back then, it was probably more of an issue.
But it's very, I mean, it's very difficult to really. What the question that he asked pushed him to define what the transgression is. Once you know what you did wrong, like what's the sin, then I could know. Can I justify an abortion if that's what the sin is? So he's got a very, very interesting interpretation of what sin I transgress when I do an abortion. And he says, well, does anyone here know what's the very first mitzvah in the Torah? Does anyone know what it is? Excellent. Peru Revu. The first mitzvah in the Torah is to bring children into the world. The Rav Uziel, in his book Mishpatei Uziel, says an abortion is a transgression of the mitzvah of Peru Revu. Now, if somebody isn't blessed with a child, they didn't go against the mitzvah of bringing a child into the world. They just didn't fulfill the mitzvah. But if there's a fetus and I destroy the fetus, I'm transgressing the mitzvah of Peru Revu, of bringing a child into the world. Now, the problem with that interpretation is a revolutionary understanding of the mitzvah, because Peru Revu is a positive mitzvah. Nachon? And we're saying that I can transgress a positive mitzvah. You follow what I'm saying? Which is a revolutionary way to look at a positive mitzvah. But assuming, according to him, destroying a fetus is transgressing the mitzvah of Peru Revu, then in this situation, Rav Uziel says she'd be permitted to do an abortion. Do you know why? Because it's not an act of Peru Revu. It's not an act of anti-Peru Revu. Why does she want to get rid of the fetus? I would love to have a child. My greatest joy in the world would be to bring a child into the world. It's not a declaration against Peru Revu. Rather, it's a declaration for my ears. You follow? And therefore, he says, even though abortion is wrong, and we see that it's wrong, and from all the sources we thought beforehand, there's a punishment if you do it, and the reason why you're punished is because you're going against Peru Revu. But this woman isn't going against Peru Revu, and therefore she'd be allowed to do it. You hear that? Now, I translate it. I'm going to read this out. Do you see this? There are grounds to forbid abortion of a fetus or killing it based on the Gemara that any Jew who doesn't involve himself in the mitzvah of procreation is as if they're a murderer. Be fruitful and multiply. Peru Revu. If this is what's stated concerning someone who doesn't bring a child into the world, someone who did not perform any act, how much more so for someone who did the act? In other words, the fetus exists, and they're preventing the development of a new Jewish soul. When I destroy a fetus, I'm going against the mitzvah of bringing a child into the world. However, it is clear that this only applies concerning one whose sole aim is to kill the fetus. However, anything that is for the sake of the mother is permitted. Therefore, we apply to the present situation. According to the doctors, the fetus will cause the mother permanent deafness. I therefore permit the abortion of the fetus. You hear that? Isn't that brilliant? Because he's explained what the Isur is. As soon as you know what the Isur is, then I know whether it's permitted or not. Is that clear? Okay, that's source number one. Source number two. Any questions on Mishpatei Uziel? Any comments on what he said? Any he'arot? Joy, happiness? Okay. We're going to add... No, okay. So the second one is from Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg was a survivor of the Shoah, and after the war he went to live in Switzerland, and he wrote there. He wrote 4 volumes, I think, of Responsa, a very, very important modern halachic authority. Now, he disagrees with the Mishpatei Uziel in explaining what do I do wrong when I do an abortion. He says that the prohibition against an abortion is because you're not allowed to cause yourself pain. Chabala. Now, he was writing his, I imagine, probably in the 1950s or the 1960s. As we said, in those years there was a huge shift in survival after giving birth. It was also around that time, the beginning of the 20th century, the majority of people, sort of 95% of mothers, gave birth at home. And then at the end of the 20th century, 95% of mothers give birth in hospital. And so his mama is really in that shift. So he's saying, why, according to him, why is it forbidden to have an abortion? So an abortion is an operation. Like it's surgery. That's what I meant. It's surgery. You're not allowed to put yourself in unnecessary pain. It's called chabala. Chabala is to cause. You're not allowed to draw blood. I know we haven't discussed this, but maybe one day we can. The question of cosmetic surgery is a big question. Also, piercings. Am I allowed to pierce my ears? There's a very great rabbi who, the Rosh Yeshiva of Alon Shvut, of Yeshivat Har Etzion, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, when his daughter wanted to do earrings, he took his daughter to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was the Gedol Ador in Yerushalayim at the time, to ask him if his daughter would be allowed to have earrings, because, you might draw blood. I don't know if you do draw blood. Apparently you don't. But it could be if it's higher. But it's...
it's very likely that you get a little bit of...
It's not... Yeah, especially nowadays when people move further up and down. Yeah, but I'm really not the person to speak about these things. And it drew blood, no?
Well, it drew blood, yeah.
Well, there you are. Thank you so much. But then it will heal up soon, Be'ezrat Hashem. Maybe. Yeah. Anyway, so to draw blood is forbidden. To draw blood is chabala. So he explains that any time that I have an unnecessary operation or sort of I'm not doing it out of medical necessity, but I'm doing it because I want to, then I transgress the Isur of Chabala. You hear that? Now, why is that an important definition of abortion? Because according to him, the Sridei Eish, the earlier you are in a pregnancy, the easier it might be to allow an abortion. You hear what I'm saying? So, for example, in halakha, there is something, I don't actually know very much about these things, but there's a pill that people could take called the morning after pill. The morning after pill, that if, people want to destroy a fetus. So according to Rav Yair Bachrach, in his first explanation, and he said it's forbidden to do abortion because it's spilling seed, so then it would be forbidden to take that pill. Also, according to Rav Uziel, if I'm trying to go, I'm going against bringing a child into the world, that would also be forbidden. But according to the Sridei Eish, Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, that it's about wounding myself, then taking a pill the following day I'm not going to draw any blood, it's not going to cause any pain. So there's a huge difference, according to him, between aborting a fetus, days after conception, and aborting a fetus, 5 months after conception. A few days after, they're all forbidden. But there's more leniency, according to the Sridei Eish, earlier on in the pregnancy. You hear that? So each reason, each isur, meaning each halachic definition of the isur, explaining each explanation of the reason why it's forbidden has different ramifications. You follow what I mean by that? Because let's say 5 months into a pregnancy, Rav Uziel might allow an abortion because it's not anti-Peru Revu, but the Sridei Eish might say it is forbidden because that's a serious operation that you need to do in order to remove the fetus. You follow what I'm saying? I'm going to read the Sridei Eish. Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg. Within the first 40 days of pregnancy, it is permitted to abort the fetus because before 40 days it is mere waters, as stated in the Gemara, and it is not considered a fetus at all. This is the position of the later halachic authorities. After 40 days, Maharit states that the base of the prohibition is a prohibition against wounding oneself. The notion of wounding oneself certainly does not apply prior to 40 days. But after 40 days, Yabetz, that's Rav Yaakov Emden, is lenient if the fetus is causing pain to the mother. This extends even to a healthy fetus, even if the pain is not life-threatening. In other words, if the pain to the mother with the fetus is greater than the pain to the mother without the fetus, then she'd be allowed to abort the fetus. You follow? Because I'm not allowed to cause myself unnecessary pain. But if the pain with the fetus is greater than the pain without it, then I would be allowed to do it. I just want to point out in brackets a very, very important thing for everybody, and that is we are not giving halachic rulings in our discussion. We are only looking at different halachic authorities grappling with a fascinating modern question. They looked at the sources that we looked at, and they were left with like a tricky situation. I know it's wrong, but I have to find out why it's wrong. And each one trying to find the reason why it's wrong, and then the halachic ramifications of each of their reasons. But that's our goal, is only to enjoy the minds of Gedolei Yisrael, but not to give any halachic rulings. Is that clear? Okay. Now, the first opinion that we looked at, Rav Uziel, he was the chief rabbi, Sephardi chief rabbi in Israel, as I mentioned. The second opinion that we looked at, Rav Yechiel Yaakov Weinberg, was a rabbi in Switzerland. The third person we're going to look at is Rav Moshe Feinstein. Rav Moshe Feinstein was in
US.
America. Excellent. Now, he lived in New York, in the Lower East Side of New York. And he is the strictest of the positions that we're going to look at. And I wondered to what extent the world in which they live in, and like the discussion of abortion, on the street, has an impact on the halachot, the way they rule. Okay. So listen what he writes about it in 2 places. It might be in more than 2 places, but 2 that I'm going to mention here. So he says, since the prohibition of abortion is murder, did you hear that? It is obvious even when there is the child will only live a short life and it will suffer all that time, it won't be able to think, and it will always need attention. Beyond that which a mother is capable of doing, it's likely that the mother will become ill. Despite all this, you're not allowed to kill a fetus. The fetus has the same prohibition of murder as a complete healthy fetus. So according to Rav Moshe Feinstein, stricter than all the others, and I might even add, adding to what we saw in the Psukim, that he's saying that abortion is forbidden. Why? Because abortion is murder. Now, what's difficult is that we just spent half an hour ago explaining that it's not murder. So how can Rav Moshe Feinstein say it's murder? Now look what he writes in the following, in a subsequent response about abortion. He writes, the situation in the world around him makes it necessary to build a fence around Torah. How important it has become not to rule leniently in this strict prohibition of murder. He said it again. Do you understand that what Rav Moshe Feinstein is saying? Nowadays, two things have happened in America. He died in the 1980s. So he was writing in the 1960s, and 1970s in New York. 1960s, 1970s New York was probably a crazy place. Anyway, so Rav Moshe Feinstein there are two things that are happening. First of all, babies are a lot, childbirth is becoming safer. Many people have survived, and the abortion rates are going up. Now, if I understand that abortion is murder, so I'm going to be much more careful about the way I behave. You follow? I mean, if I say, it's okay, it's wounding myself, and if the worst comes to the worst, you can take a pill. It's not perfect, but there's a solution. But Rav Moshe Feinstein, understood that as a halachic authority, it's his responsibility to protect the Jewish family. It's only when Torah Jews understand how serious it is that we, as Torah observant Jews, will create the appropriate boundaries in our societies. You follow? I'll understand that if chas v'shalom, people, do things that are wrong, they are playing with fire, and there's no way out of it. You follow? And therefore, Rav Moshe Feinstein rules strictly. He rules strictly in a way that perhaps even went beyond the simple understanding of the verses, and even the simple understanding of the Mishnah, because we said that the life of the mother takes precedence over the right life of the fetus, and that's true, and even he would agree with that. But we have to view abortion as murder. And why do we have to view it as murder? Because we have to protect the Jewish family. So we see from Rav Moshe Feinstein that the role of Gadol Ador, the role of the Gedolei Yisrael, of our leaders, is not just, you can't just Google an answer in order to get Psak Halacha. You follow? You have to consult with Gedolei Yisrael. You have to speak to the leaders, or you have to, we speak to our teachers, and then you speak to the leaders of the Jewish people, and the leaders of the Jewish people are the ones that protect the Jewish family, protect Jewish values. And sometimes they'll go beyond our narrow definitions, and they'll explain halacha in a way that will preserve Jewish values better than if I were to Google an answer. You follow that? Okay, sweet, wonderful people. I want to summarize very briefly. We saw in our first section that abortion is wrong, and we saw that it's not murder, right? Because we said ason is a murder. The wife, if the woman dies, that's an ason. And then the person who killed the woman is put to death. But if there's no ason, the woman didn't die, then there's a punishment, but it's not the capital punishment. So abortion is wrong, but it's not murder. That's the first point. The second point we saw is that the din of pikuach nefesh applies to a fetus, which is amazing, because we have three categories. You have a category of a human being, and then you have my property, and then you have in the middle a fetus. It's not my property, and it's not a human being, but it's a potential human being, and we'll connect back to what Zachariah said. I'm going to break halakha to preserve the life of this fetus, because break one Shabbat and allow them to enjoy another 120 years of Shabbatot. That's the second. Then we understand it's wrong, we understand it's not murder, but what particular sin did I transgress? And we saw 4 options. We saw from the Middle Ages, Rav Yair Bachrach, who said it was spilling seed. We saw from Rav Uziel in Mushbitei Uziel that it is the anti-Pru'uravu. I have a mitzvah to bring children into the world. This is the anti-Pru'uravu, preventing a child from coming into the world. According to the Shriti Eish, I'm not allowed to wound myself, and therefore to have an abortion would wound myself. And then finally we saw the position of Rav Moshe Feinstein, the strictest of all, who, in order to preserve the integrity of the Jewish people, ruled that abortion is murder. Now, we people will not be giving halachic rulings based on our discussion just now, but I think that there are 3 important ideas. First of all, it's exciting to see how ancient Jewish texts can grapple with a modern question. The psukim in Parshat Mishpatim were not thinking about a modern abortion, and yet they are the basis of the halachot concerning the modern abortion. That's number 1. Number 2 is to see the variety in halachic opinions, because they're all writing approximately at the same time, and they all have very different opinions. Perhaps the environment in which they live have an impact on the rulings that they give, but it's an amazing thing that it's so undefined. It allows for the halachic creativity of modern halachic authorities. But the most important thing that we see from Rav Moshe Feinstein is the importance of having a teacher. That you have to learn halakha from people rather than from the internet. Because when you learn from the internet, you don't get the values. You don't get an answer that is geared to your particular question. You just get an answer that if you put in information, it'll give you back the information. But sometimes there are factors in a halachic decision that we don't know about or that we may not be aware of. And that's why the importance of having teachers, the importance of having rabbinic authorities to guide us when we're making halachic decisions, and not relying exclusively on Google to give us our psak halacha. Yishar koach to everybody. We'll pause there.